Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome. I hope you guys had fun at the Living Universe talk. I certainly did. I went way over time, so as everyone's getting here late, that's entirely my fault. I agree, I should have had more time. So we're going to do a quick round of introductions here. I think this, yep, we're good. CCP Master Plan.
Yo. Hi, so I'm CCP Masterplan, Senior Software Engineer on Gameplay.
Hi, I'm CCP Tobeans. I am a software engineer on the ecosystem team.
You guys relatively know me at this point. I am CCP Aurora, a game designer for the Living Universe.
Hi, I'm CCP Delegate Zero. I'm a senior narrative designer.
Hey everyone, I'm CCP Fozzie. I'm a senior game designer.
Hey everyone, CCP Paradox. I'm a producer in the Living Universe.
Hello, CCP Psych. I'm the Director of Economy and Systems for EVEOnline.
All right, so it's good to see you all here. This room is not big enough, but if anyone is kind of in the back, there are a few open seats down here. If you want to come trickle in, make use of them all. I see 6. All right, so we don't have anything specifically prepared. I kind of rambled for a good half hour earlier, so we're basically just going to go straight to a proper roundtable. So if you guys have questions, we would ask you to kind of I will select people from the audience, and then we'll have you come up to a mic, and could we maybe slide that mic like over here to the center? Thank you. All right. I saw your hand come up first, sir.
That's happened before. So, first of all, I think I promised. First of all, obviously, thank you for addressing some of the elephants in the room that we've been talking about for 8 years now. It all looks very promising, but obviously we don't have specific mechanics yet. It looks still like the Plex system is going to be one of the key mechanics. Fine. Do you have something to address one of the elephants in the room, which is unfitted AFK chips deplexing in space?
Yes. So the way that I was looking at AFK plexing is kind of as a systemic issue. At the moment, you have so many faction warfare systems that are almost like, you can just kind of set a bot to go like pick a random faction warfare system, deplex it, go to the next one, deplex it. It'll become a lot harder for that sort of behavior to happen if we really focus things. So if those rear guard systems, as we were calling them, are no longer very valuable. We could remove the LP entirely. The specifics of this are like still up to be discussed. If there are deep concerns about removing the LP entirely, then we can take another look at this. But we don't want people to be in the rear guard systems, plexing them and earning a ton of LP. There may be different content there. But anyone else have anything to? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing I'll add, the system as it is, so I'm one of the people that worked on the system that's in place right now, right, that's having this problem. And the intent was at least to make it better than it had been before with the scaling LP payouts for systems that are less endangered when you're deplexing. And also, but we put in things like the NPCs you have to kill so that the bots wouldn't be able to use unfitted chips for offensive plexing. The fact that you can end up with the other side's bots like bringing up the or plexers bringing up the contested level of these systems all over the war zone means that there isn't really too many of the systems that are so uncontested that you make almost nothing from deplexing. That's the kind of scaling that the Frontline system will hopefully really help us push really extremely low payouts or even no payouts for deplexing a system that's off of the front where a bot would be at its best.
Technically, you could still do a similar thing with like the front lines or the command operation systems, but the hope is that we concentrate people more efficiently, that we can kind of address that. If we still need to take a look at like people just constantly running in unfit ships, maybe we can start taking a look at, you need at least, you can only have like 2 empty module slots or something. Who knows? We can, if it remains a problem, it's always something that we can address. But at the moment, it's not currently on the roadmap.
Yeah, like we put in the code for warp core stabs, so we do have some checks for fittings, and so yeah, that is the kind of thing that we could potentially tweak with more, where we have some kind of minimum required fittings, potentially on value or potentially on number of slots. Yeah.
All right, you sir have had your hand up for a little while.
Hey there. So there was mention during, I think, some of the presentation that pirate factions might be involved there. Is there any chance that me and my Blood Raider homies from NPC Delve could, I don't know, maybe roll up and do something and fight for them or something like that?
The dream is to escape beyond the current bounds of faction warfare space. So faction warfare as it is right now is just kind of like this storm in a teacup, or whatever that phrase is that I'm probably misusing. It's very limited in scope, and it's limited in ways that don't really make sense. It kind of feels like its own little universe off to the side, and it really could be something that could reach in more. So for example, the current bounds of faction warfare space might shift. Perhaps there are systems that become more vulnerable in high security space, or perhaps this spreads into null security space. It makes a lot of sense in particular to get the null sec NPC factions more involved and have that almost become an extension of faction warfare space. This is probably like somewhat future music. At the moment, we're probably more likely to look at this in terms of the 4 empires at the start, but it's just the start, and we would really love to get everybody else involved. Go ahead.
And I'll just add that that's one of the ways we're approaching this is that initially it's, whatever you want to think about it, as an overhaul, revamp, expansion, extension of existing factional warfare in terms of the setup, but under the hood, rebuilding elements of it in a way that we can change the factions that are involved. It doesn't need to be the same war all the time. Certain wars could come to an end and different players come into conflict or involve themselves on the side. And we've all along been saying, I think everybody, we would love to get the pirates involved. But of course, factional warfare needs a lot of love, and we foundationally need to start with the big 4 empires. But we're building it in such a way that that's where we want to head, other factions involved in the end.
I've taken a couple people from this side of the room. You've had your hand up for a while. I'll try and pick somewhat randomly.
Hi. So you mentioned the scale of faction warfare changing. So are you looking at permanent changes, Trigvasion style, system swapping, and then that being a permanent change that affects the universe from there?
It's not like faction warfare will entirely come to an end. We're looking at the end of this. We want to have at the end of the initial push into faction warfare, we want to have a system where there's still dynamic gameplay happening. Whether that's something like an NPC AI general who's like, this is now our target system, and objectives kind of naturally occur that are being given to the players. That said, if there are larger scale events, would you like to chime in on this? This is more your area.
I think there's an important point to make here about the word permanent. I would say the approach really, the vision, part of the vision is nothing is permanent anymore, is where we want to head towards. So there may be what I would call semi-permanent changes. Systems and constellations, even regions, might fall in and out of what happens to be factional warfare. And I want to say that some systems now that are factional warfare may not be factional warfare in the future, and some systems that you might not imagine would be in factional warfare may come into factional warfare. I mean, we're thinking about yeah, maybe we're thinking about it's crossed our minds. We're thinking about high sec, null sec. There's many ways we can go. As you know, not all of low sec is in factional warfare. So yeah, that's an important thing that I think it's important for you guys to know. We're kind of working towards that idea of it's not just the same old war constantly for whatever the hell it is, 12 years more, just backwards and forwards. And that's actually a really important aspect of, you can win it, and then it shifts to a different kind of war, potentially, or maybe that war comes to an end, and another one flares up somewhere else. So that's an important thing, because this sense of not being able to ever win it is because it's just the same old systems penduluming backwards and forwards.
Awesome.
Something that we want to make sure that you know as well is that we don't want to leave you without content. If you're a dedicated Minmatar pilot, which I think there's a couple in here, then if one more comes to an end, it's not like there's no faction warfare to play until we start up some other event. So there will always be content for you to participate in. You, sir, have been waiting to go since the start.
Yeah, a bit of a mean one. Timescales, what can we expect to see in the next few weeks, months, years?
Yep, so the Frontline system and like the first arc, the first real introduction of content is all slated to, we're hoping to get that all to you this year. So it's gonna take us a little bit of time. There will be a couple months where we'll be really busy in production. But hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have everything for you. All right, not everything for you. Like, we're not gonna have the pirate factions. Yeah, geez, I'm taking real.
Well, it'll be after summer, is
Yeah.
basically the safest thing I can say. But we are, basically what we shot today, we've been in a lot of discussions. I think for me, in production, I've been calculating, we've had over, I think it was over 32 hours of chats. All of these people here have just been in several meetings figuring out Factional Warfare, so we have a lot of things that extend beyond Arc 1, which is basically our starting point. But this year, so sorry, not dates, but we'll definitely be coming to you with more information. I don't know during summer, but I mean, basically as soon as we know some of the details, we're just trying to scope out, like, we've tried to make ourselves a lot more free to not pre-scope things that sound really exciting but sound a bit impossible. We want to actually really explore what is possible with some smart solutions so that we can bring really amazing stuff. So otherwise we might have just like made something too quickly which wasn't that great. So but after summer.
At the moment, the company, as you've kind of noticed, is moving away from quadrants. So we're not really working with the quadrant system anymore, and the quadrants were almost a fairly big impact on the development side because they kind of like boxed the scale of things. And so we're hoping to get you like slightly larger features than the quadrants we're offering, which means it'll take a little bit more time, but we're entering pre-production this week. So a lot of the core of what you've heard so far at Fanfest is slated to come in 2022. Just might be closer to Q4.
Like we do have, like there are bigger things in play, but I know Aurora has been very passionate about looking at changes that don't need to sit with a really large feature. I mean, basically, if you're familiar with Talos and our sort of rapid, how quick we're releasing certain balance changes, we are building up like a backlog of those to like things that don't need to be this gigantic sort of release, but just are really good to get out now, start to affect the landscape of Factional Warfare before we do the big things such as Frontline. So that's also being built up. So we're not going to go fully dark for a long period of time. I think we are actually going to release a few things.
Yeah, there's a lot of the Faction Warfare, the TLC stuff that I was looking at that can come, and plus the non-Faction Warfare TLC stuff. We have, ideas about structures that we can take a look at and that sort of thing. So there will be a little bit of content, but it won't be like a huge amount, and then all of a sudden, like you'll have this whole new system to play with, like at some point.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll add is over this time period between now and when the big collection of Arc 1 stuff lands towards the end of the year, There's also going to be continuing events going on all the time, and those will be tied into the storyline of this Arc 1. We're treating it as essentially this prelude to the stuff that's going to be happening in the bigger content drop. Those of you who are familiar with our kind of normal schedule of events will know that over the summer, our events tend to be very lore and empire focused, and we're going to be taking advantage of that to make sure we're kind of seeding interesting storylines and getting things rolling towards the things that'll reach a flashpoint towards the end of the year.
I took one from the side of the room. Let's go with our CSM member over here, Arzia. Faction Warfare CSMs. This is a very fitting panel.
All right. First of all, thank you for announcing my entire platform in the keynote. Second of all,
you've been the most effective CSM in history.
Half a term. All right. Anyway, right now, as Faction Warfare stands, the two of each of the empires are allied with one another, Galente with Minmatar and Amar with Caldari. For these future evolving wars, are those going to, allegiances always going to be in place, or are they going to maybe not be in place if, like, we have Kaleli 2, Electric Boogaloo, and the Minmatar go shoot the Galente or something?
I will leave this one to CCP Delegate 0.
All right. Right. Kaleli 2, Electric Boogaloo, coming near. You gonna tell me to go away again, DC?
I don't rule anything out.
All right, Corvus, you've had your hand up for a while.
Hi there.
Hello.
Just a question about citadels, especially neutral citadels in war zones. Is there any plans to deal with those, and is there any possibility of faction warfare specific structures?
Faction warfare specific structures is a sweet idea, and I would love to talk about that more at some point. We don't have anything specifically slated for faction warfare specific structures, but anything's possible. In terms of neutral structures, this is a conversation that I would actually love to have with you guys because it's a really important one in the faction warfare ecosystem. Right now, like, players can go and dock in enemy militia stations because they have docking rights. How we approach this is a little bit questionable. The problem is that there's an overlap of people using that space, obviously. Like, there's a lot of people who live in that space and don't care about faction warfare, and maybe they just put up these free ports because, like, they make a little tax money and they don't mind. It makes it less likely for people to shoot them because they can use them, that sort of thing. And so I want to be cautious about totally crushing that. There's a lot of people that live there that would be upset if we just kicked them out. So, yeah. So I don't think we're just going to kick you out, but it's possible, like, for example, and this is purely just tossing something out there, the militia of that system that controls it, like, they basically, like, storm your station, and they're like, you can't let these people dock. So we could just, like, apply an ACL over top of these stations, which if you're in an enemy militia and they control the system, like, you just don't get docking and tether. And that's kind of the sort of solution that we're looking at. If there are major concerns, all right. If there are, like, if you guys have specific, like, ecosystem concerns with exactly the impacts of that, I'm super happy to talk with you about that. A lot of hands went up at this, oh boy. Oh, yeah.
You done?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, this is also where the allegiance mechanics will start to become important. Right now, with the kind of binary, or trinary, I guess, you're either a defending faction, you're an attacking faction, or you're neutral. And then the structure might be owned by a defending corp, or an attacking corp, or a neutral corp. So you've got, like, so many different combinations of things. So the allegiance system is potentially one route to saying we're going to pledge this structure to its allegiance via the corp. We've talked about yeah, we have talked about like faction cores. Maybe that's a way to do this. We might do it in other mechanics, we don't know, but that's the sort of thing we're thinking. So maybe you put a specific core in, and then that's kind of locked in that structure as a way of kind of solving the, oh, this week we're going to flip to red side, next week going to flip to blue side, you know, solve it that way.
I'm going to go with you, yes.
The gentleman kind of, before me, kind of asked my question, but I just wanted to reiterate. I did a story for Talking Stations about why kind of faction warfare was not really viable anymore, and I can talk to like a number of the old veterans, and one of their consistent, the same thing they said over and over again was how Citadels ruined the importance of having a beachhead, and because they would just like leapfrog these Citadels around and was very unimportant. So I would humbly recommend taking a look at that, because that was pretty important in the research that I did.
Yes, I don't want to go through the year and not have this addressed within 2022. It might require an early draft of the allegiance system. We're entering like the pre-production phase next week, hopefully, and so we'll be kind of digging into the specifics a little bit more. But you know, what's especially useful for us at this roundtable is getting a really good idea of like exactly where do the problems lie, where could it, with solutions that you're thinking of, like what pitfalls can we avoid? Like we don't want to put something in place that's like, oh, we didn't. There's this whole like extra little niche issue which just really happens a lot in EVE, so something to just watch out for. But yes, we absolutely want to address structures. Yes, sir.
Hi, I have a question, and I think the bee on my back might give it away. But how are you going to solve the problem of what if we decide to pour 35,000 characters into faction warfare, and how is that going to be good for the gameplay rather than disastrous?
Yeah, it's a perfectly good question. In some ways, I think that the mechanics of faction warfare space itself are limiting. So there's almost like a limit of the number of people that you can really effectively run a system with. If you pour in 35,000 people and they just like crush one side of the war zone, like I'm super happy to see a whole bunch of people in the war zone, but at the same time, you're gonna get like no LP because there's not enough systems for you. So I think that's kind of a major reason that we don't see the nullsec alliances kind of pour in already, besides the whole having to leave your alliance thing. But there's just kind of natural limitations in place that if it becomes a problem, where like all of a sudden we see a ton of people joining, then we can kind of look at that. But you guys have any other thoughts on this?
I mean, I think that the very basic version of it is the more the merrier. Like, if a lot of there's people, big groups of people can join. They don't have to be coming from nullsec, right? Like, if people want to get involved in the feature, then that's great. And this is a feature that we always need to make sure it's designed to be flexible, because we don't enforce even sides. And that's true even if we didn't have any other areas of the game that could have people pop in and join. So if the system is set up in a way that makes the gameplay fun, even if the numbers of people on either side is lopsided, then that'll also stand true even if a whole bunch of goons come in.
I mean, I'm just going to...
Sorry,
go ahead. I want to say, I agree with what Fozzie just said there very much, but also I think there might be an element of turnabout is fair play in the other direction, because the vision, this idea of the spillover and spill out from factional warfare into other areas is important to bear in mind, and certainly not initially, but we're on a road to, in the end, some of these factional loyalists may be able to affect the 0-0 territorial warfare game. So there would be a symmetry potentially at the moment, like just pouring in your alliance or your coalition. That would be kind of an asymmetrical thing. But in the end, if it's fair for the factional warfare to spill over, then that kind of answers why it's fair for 0-0 to spill back in.
Torvald, our former CSM, who also talked about faction warfare.
I just wanted to ask about Corp and Alliance income for faction warfare, seeing if that was something y'all are going to address soon, or because right now it's really hard for Corps and Alliances to really have any kind of living in, you know, low sec unless they have like null sec or some of the moons, but not yet.
If you are thinking about it, well, not in the context of FW for now, but if you paid attention to Ratati's presentation, there is something there. But for you know, as far as FW and the main gameplay of FW, we have ideas, but they're not really coming soon. That is, it's not a priority. But as Nick said earlier, we try to go towards this leveling of fields between like gameplays and kind of normalize what is happening, so a new player doesn't have to learn 3 different ways of how to conquer a system. And I believe you can see where that goes. But yeah.
I just want to say we're also exploring the difference of like personal sort of rewards and progression, as well as communal or societal kind of rewards and progression, which is also includes like cooperation alliance. They're part of communities involved in that too.
And it was mentioned in Ratati's presentation as well, but taxing additional things through like a VAT tax and an LP tax is a good way to help those low-sec corporations that don't really have an income stream to generate one. Phantomite. There's a lot of names I recognize here today. Our other CSM, I think we've worked our way through the CSM in the room.
Right now, there's a huge problem in that loads of us who want to fight each other, particularly in fleets of all sizes, we hang around sitting docks waiting for somebody else to undock first to go and fight them. Are there going to be any opportunities in faction warfare? Because like in Pochven, there's valuable PVE that gets fleets there already. Mm-hmm. Are there going to be any extra opportunities in faction warfare for fleet PVE that requires that they be ready for PvP?
Yes. So I had mentioned in the presentation, like the term I had thrown out was like battlefield sites. I don't have a specific design for you yet, but the hope is to like generate a PvE experience that is a little bit more like whether or not there's another player there, it feels like you're kind of in a fleet fight. And you can help to kind of push the faction warfare thing that way. We have to play with it a lot because in faction warfare, for the same reason that the current rats do almost no damage, we don't want to completely kind of crush out the PvP ecosystem in the middle of that. So it's kind of it's an interesting balance that we have to play with, but we'll get there. We do want to add additional content, particularly to those frontline systems. You, sir.
Currently, one of the biggest issues with system contestment is downtime plexing. So as soon as the server comes up, there could be up to 10 plexes in the system. And if you've got system control at that point, you can take 7-10% in one go. Can you slow that spawn down to normal rate so you don't automatically get that massive spawn in?
Yeah, we've done some similar things in other places in the past where we kind of stagger things for, say, the first 30 minutes. And a very old example was officer spawns. Like the first 30 minutes after every startup, you would scan through all the belts. Oh, there's all the officers. And you kind of got a quick and easy reset. So we can do similar things like that. But something that was also touched on in the presentation was kind of changing the throttles on how quickly you can get LP or you can get like progress moving either way. So that's another way we could solve that, yeah.
There's a particularly large tempo challenge in faction warfare, as I've particularly heard several times from talking to you guys, with kind of the tension between US and EU, where EU will kind of raise one thing and then the stronger US faction shifts it the other way. It's not necessarily a terrible thing because in some ways you're indirectly interacting with each other. You know, that's okay in some ways, but at the same time, like I can understand it. it can be a little bit frustrating to like log in and like, all our hard work was done while we're not online. That said, like, we're probably not going to hit you with like, these systems are only active in this time zone sort of thing. I think that would be a little bit too harsh. Do you have anything you guys wanted to add on that? Okay. I just did this side of the room. Yes, if you'd like to come up. I'll try to get some more people from the back.
In terms of allegiance, right, currently we can sort of look at employment history when recruiting and stuff to at least try and figure out if there's a spy. So is there going to be any sort of more or less reliable way for us to do a decent vetting process with the allegiance thing, so someone doesn't just hop sides all the time, and especially with the bots jumping sides constantly?
With the allegiance thing, I don't know how much it'll give you. Do you have thoughts on this? That way?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked a lot about allegiance system, and I think it's the interest there is to expose a lot of interesting things there, like on the characters. It ties a lot into character identity for allegiance. It's like it might be whether you are you have an allegiance to a particular faction. You might want to declare an allegiance to an agent in the future. You might say, "This is my best friend." It could be a particular region of space, but allegiance could expand more beyond than just the four sort of empire or militias. We see it as progressing a bit more, and that could add flavor to your particular character. You might unlock uniforms, for example, if you declare allegiance to a Mar or things like that. So, in terms of finding out more information from a particular person on what allegiances there are, we will set most likely some type of criteria and maybe some type of decay or fail conditions. If you declare allegiance to Yamar but you kill a bunch of them, that may set you as never being able to ally to them ever again. Or you might have to really redeem yourself in their eyes. But there's going to be some kind of barriers or gates that we might choose. Some things we might not for particular types of allegiances, but I think overall, the way we've talked about it internally is a very flexible system, because our current systems, like standings is one of the biggest one, is a bit inflexible to give us the kind of future-proof sort of decision-making or checks that we want to do for people and characters or corporations. So I think Allegiance you'll see from the beginning, you'll see very Factional Warfare flavored as we make our first steps there, but overall, in the future, I think you'll see it evolve into a really sort of identity kind of system where you get to set a lot of this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the vetting issue. So some of you will remember when you could see other people's standings. Now, if my memory serves me correctly, the reason that had to go away was essentially a resource management issue, because the server was constantly kind of checking. And standings are not quite real time, but they're close enough to real time that they're updating so frequently. When you have a lot of characters, it's similar with some other things that cause lag, when you're constantly checking like thousands of characters in the system. But with the allegiance system, because it would be a more granular sort of, not permanent, but semi-permanent choice that would stay around. It would not change in real time. It would mean we could actually contemplate having an allegiance history. And that would be an aid to vetting. So that answers that thing. I mean, one of the ways I think about this issue of diplomacy with NPCs, we had the standing system, and we've kind of been getting along with one wing of an NPC diplomacy system for nearly 20 years. The standing system is a reputation system. So we've had the reputation system, but we haven't had the declare who you want to belong to part of it, the allegiance half of it. And it sounds kind of crazy that we haven't had this really, except in Factional Warfare has a rudimentary, to be quite honest, a rudimentary version of this through the militia system. But what we want to do is we want to build a proper system for declaring allegiances. We're going to use Factional Warfare as the lever to get that. It'll be a starting point for the allegiance system. But we're thinking about it in a way that this can be used throughout the game, ultimately. And I think it'll provide a large number of opportunities for many other aspects of the game outside Factional Warfare. So that's kind of give you a little bit of an insight into how we're thinking about that.
You, sir.
So just on the allegiance point, at the moment, Fac War is binary, so you would need to declare for one side or another, and that keeps certain groups like my own out of the gameplay. If it's possible to declare against a faction without necessarily declaring for their opponents, is that something that is possible because it would increase conflict with one side without necessarily playing for the other team?
We've been talking about this. We were just talking about this the other week. Like, it suddenly occurred to a couple of us, but we could have a negative allegiance, i.e. declare against someone without having to. So the example would be, I want to fight the Glente, but I don't want to declare allegiance to the Caldari. Well, can we have a version of it? Man, I'm not promising this would be in like version 1, but can we work towards a version of it where you could say, I'm just going to declare that I am an enemy, a rival of the Glente, rather than having to declare that I'm a friend of the Caldari. And I don't see why not if we build this system in the flexible way that we're thinking about it.
10.
So right now, one of the factors in participating in faction warfare that comes up a lot, or in low-sec PvP in general, is your security status, which is, when you are in a militia, it sort of gives you certain permissions, but only against certain groups. And I guess, so I'm sort of wondering how you envision that working with these allegiances, either declaring for or declaring against. This is going to be the same kind of relationship where if I'm like, I'm on this side fighting these guys, that doesn't necessarily affect my security status, but if I fight anyone else, or, if I declare allegiance to the Gueristas, am I going to be welcome in HiSec? Has that relationship been explored at all, or?
I'd say it's still under construction, conversation. The specifics of this we don't have for you today. Nick, would you like to elaborate? This is very much your area.
The clear thing, building something like an allegiance system has a lot of complexities because it's a very social system, and as soon as you get into a highly social system in a game like EVE, there are all sorts of little things you need to think about, and it's like, okay, well, that would be a pain point for them. Do we really want to construct a trap for players? And then if there is this thing that they can get into, can we build a path out of that for them? Because there's things in the standings realm, the current system, you're aware, I think, a lot of there's many traps and pitfalls in the standings system, and it's really, really hard to dig your way out of that. That is very much on our minds. Like, let's not build another system that's full of traps.
Yeah. We don't want you to participate in faction warfare, or I hate the situation where people want to do a thing, but they won't because it would take forever to earn back the Caldari standing, and I need to get to Jita. It's very much the sort of thing that's on our mind. There needs to be some, it's for the universe to feel appropriately reactive. There needs to be something there. There needs to be some sort of response from the universe to the things that you do in it. But at the same time, it's a game, and we don't want it to be completely suffocating. So it's something very much on our minds at the moment.
Yeah, dealing with security status issues seems to be like my perennial curse that I'm never going to get away from. If anyone remembers very old Crime Watch talks at Fanfest, if you remember way back, security status used to be just a standing to Concord, the same way as you have standings to all the other factions. And one of the things we did was pull it out of standing system into a dedicated attribute by itself, and then we can start to build clearer rules on how your sec status goes up and down and tags and all those kind of things. And I feel like the allegiance is kind of like the next evolution almost of that. So we can start to build rules on what it means to be allied with these, or maybe allied against these, in terms of who can shoot who, when, and all of those things. Yes, I think like we were going to build a lot of stuff on that, and yeah, it's going to go.
How many of you guys remember having to avoid the How many of you are old enough to remember having to avoid the Sanctum constellation because you were below, you had low security status, which was low Concord standings, and the normal faction police were fine, you could slip by them, but you go into Sanctum and Concord will just wreck you. Yeah. Yeah.
You, sir, your arms are going to be real exercised after today.
I'll ask this one because no one's really brought it up yet. What have you looked at for system level? So like right now you can dump LP into iHubs to upgrade levels. This gives you bonuses for industrial parts. Currently those bonuses affect all structures, including pirates and people not aligned with the faction, which is a really weird mechanic. So I wonder what you look at.
Can you repeat the question, please?
So, system upgrade levels.
Yeah, the question was, what are we thinking about to do with that?
Yeah, what are you guys
how we
looking
think
at?
about expanding it?
Yeah.
How we thinking about maybe removing some parts?
Basically, just because no one's really talked about that yet, I was just curious.
Yes, we haven't. But we have talked about it internally.
Yes.
And talking about iHubs, I gave an answer earlier, and these guys touched on it about how we're looking at normalizing some of the systems that exist in the game. You know, you have iHubs, nullsec, do stuff. We have talked about that a lot, of updating that system. So nothing is it's coming, but we are thinking about making changes on what that could end up being that resembles a better a normalized space between, you know, low sec, FW, and player sovereignty, and what those upgrades could do, because right now they're very linear, and how we can maybe go into a system that you have options and you can't always have all of the upgrades all the time, and how we can give you more options from the ones that you have right now. And this ties into how we are thinking about diversifying the solar systems, so that not every solar system is the same, or not every solar system has the same capacity, for example, for resources, or for combat sites. That's the space that we're thinking. It's not a priority right now, but we have talked about it a lot because of player sovereignty, and now we're gonna probably start thinking about FW, iHubs, how we can upgrade those, and what that would mean into the general ecosystem.
Thank you.
I think most likely we will see the new system hit with kind of the current iHub setup, still kind of working alongside that, but it won't be a thing. It's still a thing that very much on our radar, so. What was that? I'm sorry, I'm wearing a microphone. I can't whisper.
Okay, I'm just gonna say, and this is just something we're thinking about. So I think it's interesting opportunity to get you thinking about it, and then you have the feedback. Currently, LP in Factional Warfare has two functions. It's a reward and it's an investment currency. And we're wondering if it should have those two functions. And we're wondering if should it really stick to being a reward currency, and should something else be the way you invest? Because having it do both is, it causes problems in balancing the economic aspect there. So, I mean, there's no decision made, it's just something we've been thinking about, and I think it's something that would be valuable to get your guys' feedback on.
it's a very strange place where you're like, if I don't put anything into the iHub, someone else will, and then I can still profit off of that. And that's not a great paradigm, so it's something we're very aware of, but we don't have a specific change for you today. We have time for, was this getting over at?
It's over at 5 minutes, yeah.
5 minutes from now? Okay, cool. So we have 5 more minutes. I'm going to pick a couple people so that you guys don't get stuck with your hands up here. You, sir, in the Brave shirt. And then, I'm sorry, I've already called on you, so I'm going to let you go next, and then yourself. And Caprice, and we'll do Caprice last.
So, about the goal for each factions, not only for the arc, but you talked about like NPC general having dynamic goals for factional warfare. You talk about it's not going to be just capturing a system, but it will be like maybe completing an objective, delivering stuff, or doing hacking and stuff like that. I was just wondering if you thought like, that reminded me of the community goal from Elite Dangerous. I don't know if some of you know the systems. I was wondering if for those goals we will have personal reward according to the size that we have contributed to what the goal. For example, delivering stuff, the same thing as in the Elite Dangerous community goal. When you deliver a cargo, you get paid instantly for that delivery towards the goal. And then, depending on the completion of the goal and if you succeed or not, you get another payout. And I was wondering if those two kinds of payouts were also planned for what you had in mind for the goals for factional warfare and beyond just Empire Factional Warfare, or if it was more toward a community-based pool and less about personal rewards per contribution.
So the way that I'm kind of looking at this is like if we're just killing the tier system. Like I want to get a really, it'll make him really happy too. If I want to get a really good idea of just how much LP is being generated from the higher tiers, and then we can basically redistribute that through other methods. So for something like delivering goods to help complete an objective, you could deliver things and then you get paid out. It's almost like completing a Plex elsewhere. Like you get your like instant like standard payout, and then you're also like on the list for people who helped complete that objective. And then if the objective succeeds, like you get this reward based on your contribution, or like if the objective fails, you get this reward based on your contribution. So it should be kind of similar. So if you win after you donate, you still care about whether the objective succeeds, but you also get that little piece up front as well.
The record is 102 million LP in 1 week for 2 characters.
Yeah, no more Glamour X boosters. We won't do that again.
So during the Triglavian invasion, it was easy for null blocks to insert themselves into something like Nyarcha, where they cared about burning things down, and face very little consequences to themselves. They're based out in null. The things that are happening in the area space I care about, they can come in, do whatever they want, and then leave. One of the things you talked about was the consequences of doing certain actions and how that plays out. Like, oh, we don't want to make it so that those poor goons can't go to Jita anymore, but I really actually want to see more consequences for them when they insert themselves into Empire activity. They should really suffer.
I think a lot of those people have suffered when they realized they had to make 40 jumps to Jita some other day. But I understand what you're saying. Nick, would you like to chime in on this one?
I mean, I gave a version of an answer to that earlier to our friend from the Guerns. I would just say, yes, consequences are important in the game, but this spillover should be, ultimately it should be in both directions, I think is the answer to that issue.
All right, we are down to about 1 minute, so if you guys can make your questions quick, we'll make our answers snappy, and then we'll get out of here hopefully on time.
So I remember from the keynote, you were talking about factions being more involved with faction warfare, giving us objectives to go capture. Is there a chance we can actually see, like in the trailers, we see Supercapital fleets from both factions fighting each other? Is there a possibility in the game of that actually happening, where we see like Caldari wanting this system so bad, they send their Supercap fleet to go help us take it?
Yes.
It's safe to say yes, there is a possibility of that.
So a question that I've seen on some of the Discords, when the Frontline system comes in, is there going to be a reset of all of the systems in Fact War, or is it going to, I don't know, algorithm chooses which are the Frontline systems at that point?
Yet undecided. It's very likely we need to plan for the fact that like one side just doesn't control any space. Kind of the way that we're looking at that right now is a cop-out solution. Like their high-sec systems also create front lines if you're connected to them, so that you don't wind up with nothing. Because if every system was a rear guard and you could push nothing, that'd just be real bad. The answer is, at this point, though, we don't know. There could be a major in-game event which occurs, which kind of like disrupts the current structure, and then we start fresh at like a middle ground, like it's a face-off or an icing in hockey. Like we're dropping the puck here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.